So what I try to do here, it's a very simple point. And to go back to look at what Mill says about naming. And why Mill? Well, we got a big debate about direct reference and versus Phrygian, come out with Kripke, Marcus, and a bunch of other people in the 70s. And it's what it's now called a Millian theory of reference, or simply Millianism. It's kind of a way to characterize so-called direct reference. And the first time, or at least as far as I know, one of the first who insisted on the Mill theory of reference was Kripke in Naming and Necessity, which he mentioned Stuart Mill. And now it's come to call the Millianism, or the Millian theory of reference. It's also been called the new theory of reference, in particular by Howard Wettstein, which is kind of anachronistic because it doesn't seem to be so new, at least insofar as Mill wrote quite sometimes before Frege. So, but what I'm trying to do is a very conciliatory viewpoint to see how Millianism can sort of, at least the big picture, can sort of be combined with a form of Phrygianism and so on and so forth. So you probably know I am Swiss and we are neutral, so we don't take parts. And after I also moved to Canada 12 or 15 years ago, and Canadians are known to be the best diplomats, the nicest people in the world. So I'm trying to not to sit on one side or the other. The point is quite simple. I will try to make, is that in Mill we sort of face a tension, because on one hand Mill claimed that proper names, what we usually call names like Kepakorta, Donostia, or Canada, are the only pieces of language which denote without connoting, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, if you go back to read Mill, he say there are some constructions in which a name, he doesn't put it out this way, in which a name can also be connotative. In particular, in construction like this, Mill's example is, this is York. When you pick the object pick out is characterized as carrying the name York. And the basic idea here is that, well, we can reconcile, or we can take into account this kind of Millian view. One name can appear in predicative position, they can be connotative in some aspect, or at least in some construction, and that this, at the end of the day, does not undermine Millianism, or so-called the theory of direct reference, understood kind of Kaplanian, David Kaplan's view. And to do so, well, I say, well, we have a framework, came out in '86, at least, by John Perry. The first time he, at least as far as I know, he hints at this framework, and he developed it in 2001, the first edition, Reference and Reflexivity, in which we got the distinction between the reflexive content and the referential or official content. And well, if we adopt this kind of framework, we got what Mills tell us, and or we can accommodate this kind of Millian distinction, or between some construction in which a name can be used predicatively, or in an attributive way. And well, this is pretty much whole, and it's going to be quite a short paper, or a short exposition. It's very simple. So, well, let's go to Mill. The standard, which is, I like to read, but the famous quote, probably the most quoted in philosophy of language, people working on reference, the most quoted passage of Mill is that say what proper names are not connotative, they denote the individuals who are called by them, but they do not indicate or imply any attributes as belonging to those individuals. When we name a child by the name Paul or a dog by the name Caesar, these names are simply marked, used to name those individuals to be made subject of discourse. It may be said, indeed, that we must have had some reason for giving them those names rather than any other, and this is true. But the name, once given, is independent of this reason. You see here you already got maybe some way to spell it out, what David Kaplan called stuff within metasemantics and semantics, so the reason, or what Kripke say at some point, what a name can, or what a description can be used to fix the reference, but once the reference is fixed, the description does not play a kind of a role like a Fregean sense, and so on and so forth. And the other big passage in Mill is proper names are attached to the object themselves and are not dependent on the continuance of any attribute of the object. So, and it keeps going on, the only names of objects which connote nothing are proper names, and these have, strictly speaking, no signification. So this is so-called, well, the lesson which came out is what, like Ruth Marcus or Ovi Wettstein, it says that names are just tag, or just a mark. You tag an object in an act of baptism or a launching of the name into the community and so on, and once the name is tagged, the name works just as a tag or a mark for the object. This is the main lesson we got, well, at least it is what has been taken or considered to be one of the main lessons out of Mill and what is called kind of one of the key notions of so-called direct theory of the theory of direct reference. And after we got singular proposition and so on, the name is just a tag, and what's get up in what Kaplan calls the what is said or the content, or Kaplanian content, we got so-called a Russellian or a singular proposition in which the referent, the object, enter as a constituent, which is one of the main lessons. But yet, it's something what people never, or at least didn't much pay attention to, is that in some naming construction like of the form, or some people like E is Kepa Corta, or this is Donosti, and so on and so forth, or that woman is Mary Brown, or that is London, Mill seems to recognize that there is some information transmitted. So what the name is not just a tag, there is something more, or is something what the tag somewhat convey. So in some cases, a name can be used attributively or predicatively. And here is a quote which probably people didn't pay much attention, at least when looking at Mill. And it's, when we predicate of anything its proper name, when we say pointing to a man, this is Brown or Smith, or pointing to a city, what is yours, we do not merely by so doing convey to the hearer any information about them, except that those are their name. So no substantial information, but yet there is the information that the object designated somewhat carries a name. So the name, hence, a name like York, on top of denoting York, seems to be connotative, inasmuch as it attributes to York the property of being called York. Very so. Could call it a bit of a tension here, because on one hand, Mill says the names are just tag, their proper names are the only tool or the only pieces of language which denote without connoting, but at the same time, he say, well, at least in some construction, which seems to connote the object are the bearer of the name. So there is a bit of information transmitted. So, well, to deal with, or at least what I already claim or said, is one way to deal with this so-called tension, if we could call it a tension, is, well, let's assume the kind of framework, it seems to me, to dismiss the tension without having to give up the big lesson we got from Mill, the name are sort of tool of direct reference, in Kaplan's or even Kripke's sense. Well, it's to adopt or to use John Perry's framework when he distinguished between reflexive content and official content, and also the framework has been developed by Kepas and Perry in Critical Pragmatics, which is a book I've been told I should promote, being here in particular, otherwise they kick me off. So, well, which kind of framework is quite, well, I'm a big fan of Perry, let me say, because Perry has been introduced to me by Castagneri. He told me the only guy who understood me is John Perry, so you should go to study with Perry. And so it's this kind of framework to get the reflexive, and this, as an aside, I could say is quite Gricean in spirit, if not in the letter, at least in spirit, because Grice, at some point, he claimed, well, at least if we got an utterance or a token, or, well, there is, as being competent speaker of the language, case of English, something which I'm not, but a competent speaker of English, if he got a letter and so on and so forth, he somewhat gets some information, he can extract some information, even if he doesn't know what, let's focus on singular terms, what the singular term refers to, without grasping the content. And this is also what something within the kind of some of the debate between the semantics, the boundary between semantics and pragmatics is something that Jerry Katz at some point is say, well, what we got from semantics is, the example Katz uses is a kind of an anonymous letter. If you got an anonymous letter, well, without knowing who wrote it and so on and so forth, well, you can still get some information just by being competent with the language. And John Perry go along this way when he's some point he say, well, if you receive, for instance, a postcard, the stamp get washed away, you don't know who wrote it and so on and so forth, and from there, and the postcard say, I'm having fun here now. Well, at least by being competent speaker of English, you can say, well, whoever wrote it say that he or she was having fun when she or he, where she or he was, wrote it. This is kind of a bit of information, and this kind of information is something which can be captured in what John Perry called the reflexive content of a utterance, and so on. So within a Perry-style framework, an utterance come with different content or truth condition. The analysis starts from the reflexive content, namely the linguistic meaning, or what Kaplan called the character, what the utterance get from the sentence, the type uttered. So a sentence type, well, when uttered, the utterance inherit sort of this kind of type information. It's something what, well, I don't know if we can say that, but something what, if one is keen on Chomsky, on a kind of Chomskyan framework, you could say, well, this is a kind of semantic information or something what we can process, sometimes even at unconscious level, just like at the level we may process the syntactic or the parsing and so on and so forth. So if we consider a sentence like, or an utterance like one, I am Mary Brown, well, this kind of utterance can be spelled out or can be analyzed in adopting a Perry-style framework. In uttering it, Mary's aim is to convey to the audience her name. Think, for instance, of one as Mary's answer to the question, who are you? Mary will not reply, Mary Brown is Mary Brown. And if Mary Brown and I, uttered by Mary, are co-referential, and therefore I am Mary Brown and Mary Brown is Mary Brown, sort of, in a Kaplanian framework, say the same thing. Namely, we express the same proposition or Kaplanian content with Mary Brown and the identity relation as a constituent. There is a famous, I don't know how famous it is, but there is a nice quote in what Russell, now I forgot where, just come to my mind now. When Russell say in beautiful style, Russellian style, he say, well, when a policeman asked me, who are you? I could have replied, look who I am. Well, the policeman will not be satisfied, so Russell go on. So I take out my passport or my driving license and, got the information, I am Bertrand Russell, and the policeman will be satisfied, and so on and so forth. So the reflexive content in the Perry and Cortas framework can be cashed out as follow. There is an individual X who is the agent of I, and in one I refer to it. This is kind of inherit or kind of go along also with Kaplan's character. The character of an indexical can be represented by a function taking the context and giving as value or output the content. And there is an individual Y and a convention C such that to A, C is exploited by 1, and the convention C permits 1 to designate Y with Mary Brown and X equal Y. This is the kind of information we got from the utterance, from the token, and this is the kind of information that the utterance inherit from the sentence, the type uttered. Well, the convention C, we could spend a lot of time discussing what a convention C. One way to spell it out is to use the so-called the causal theory of reference. So there is when a name is given, when an object is baptized, or when a name is launched into a community, well, we sort of created a permissive convention which allows people in the linguistic community to refer to the object using the name or exploiting this convention. Is kind of a permissive convention. And one of the philosophers who spent a lot discussing about what they call here, what Perry calls is David. And when he discussed the case of Madagascar and so on and so forth, and he spelled out in some quite detail the so-called the causal theory of reference. So the name is related to the object, it stands for to what ends up in the proposition expressed, as a singular or Russellian proposition. Well, what ends up is the object be stand at the end of the causal connection. It's not the object which sort of satisfy a Fregean sense, whatever we take a sense to be. So this is roughly the reflexive content. To analyze this communicative act, in the case what Mary Brown, Mary Brown say, I am Mary Brown. Well, the analysis of this communicative act, we start at the level of reflexive content. In processing it, the reflexive content, the audience come to know all she needs. Namely, what the speaker of I carries the name Mary Brown, and therefore, that the person talking to her is Mary Brown. So, well, if I ask, who are you? You say, Mary Brown is Mary Brown. Well, you don't go far away. The correct answer is, I am Mary Brown. It's why when you go to conference, it may give you a, a tag here, and and when a name is used attributively, like in this is York, to use Mill's example, when a name is used in an attributive way, the speaker exploits the reflexive content of the utterance. So, although the official or referential content of an utterance, this is York, corresponds to the singular proposition with the indicated object, namely York, and the identity relation as constituent. The reflexive content mentions the name York. So it's in exploiting the reflexive content when we got the information, when the speaker or the agent talking to you carries the name Mary Brown, and so on and so forth. So by processing the reflexive content, the error comes to grasp that the indicated object carries the name York. This is York. In this kind of case, the reflexive content will be, there is an individual X referred to by the agent of 2 using the demonstrative this. There is an individual Y and the convention C said that C is exploited by 2 and C permit 1 to designate Y with York and X equal Y. This is the reflexive content of Mill's example, or this is York. Following this analysis proposed that it seems to me, we can reconcile Mill's view that name denote but do not connote with his claim that they can be used in an attributive way. Furthermore, we can do so without having to reject, based Lockwood, he got in 1975 Philosophical Review quite an influential paper on Mill when he claimed, or he defended, he said that the way we should understand Mill is to say that Mill does not accept Frege's distinction between the ease of predication, copula, and the ease of identity. So the way we should read Mill or understand Mill according to Lockwood is that a sentence like this is York or a sentence like Tully is Cicero, they are not identity sentences, identity statement of the form A equal B, but they are of the subject-predicate form, like FA. So you reject Frege's distinction between the ease of copula and ease of identity. Well, without going into the detail, I think what Frege's distinction is quite important because, as Gitsch told us, Gitsch is one of my heroes, to be honest. He told us, well, it's the genius of the young Frege who help us to develop logic and so on and so forth. And one of the main contributions by Frege is the distinction between function and object, or the distinction between subject and predicate, and he helped us to bypass all the mistake, according to Gitsch, the big mistake made by Aristotle when he introduced so-called the two-term theory in logic, or one of the main exponents has been Leibniz, and so on and so forth. But this is just an aside. Say what seems to me what the subject-predicate distinction is very important, and also, well, we don't have, and in so doing, we can assume the subject-predicate distinction without dismissing Frege's view, what a sentence or what a statement of the form, like Hesperus is phosphor is, of the form A equal A and not of the form A equal B, as Lockwood would claim. Furthermore, we can do so without having to interpret the view what the present tense of to be in 2 means identity. So a sentence like this is York, like Tully is Cicero, are statement of the form A equal B, where identity, the is the is of identity. So So an utterance like I am Mary Brown and this is York, like Esperus is phosphor, are statement, as Frege told us, of the form A equal B. We are not statement of the subject predicate form, FA. So if a name N can be used attributively, then on top of denoting N, it qualifies N as bearing N. So tokened name denote their bearer without attributing to them any substantial property the bearer needs to satisfy in order for the name to refer to it. But yet, no substantial property the name need to satisfy, but there is nonetheless this kind of unsubstantial property which is captured by the reflexive content, what the indicated object or the bearer or the referent carry the name. So another strategy to spell out this kind of view, mill view, what a name can be used in an attributive way, will be to adopt Bach nominal description theory, while what a name N is semantically, this is what Bach say, a name N is semantically equivalent to bearer of N. So for Bach, although the name Bach, although the use of a name does not mention itself, it nonetheless expresses the reflexive property of bearing itself. So, Bach analysis or Bach nominal description theory, well, it seems to me it can be subsumed or captured within the Perry framework if we adopt or we accept the distinction between referential content or official content and so-called reflexive content. And without maybe, I don't know, but there is maybe, if we buy the view what a name is semantically equivalent to bearer of N, well, maybe face some difficulties because Bach theory, being a semantic theory, may face some shortcoming. If John is equivalent to bearer of John, we can be substitute for one of the other in an extensional content. Yet, if I say I met John, does not seem to be equivalent, I met the bearer of John. So, also if we were to consider modal context, John may not have been the bearer of John, makes sense, while John may not have been John, does not make sense. And here is what one of Kripke's criticism about this kind of view. So, well, let's take it short. So names are directly referential and contribute the name's bearer to the content, to so-called the what is said, the Gricean what is said or Kaplanian content to the proposition expressed, the singular proposition. As such, names are tool of direct, what we call nowadays Millian reference. Yet, tokened name connotes the reference as being the bearer of the tag of the name. So a tokening of York directly refers to York without the mediation of a Fregean sense or mode of presentation. York must satisfy to be the bearer of York. Yet, the tokening of York as a connote, the bearer are carrying that specific name. So, however, a tokening of York on top of denoting York connote it as bearing York. This connotative aspect should be understood as a reflexive property the name, or better, the tokening of the name generate. We can say that being the bearer of N or being called N is a property articulated by the very utterance of the name. Is what Perry in 86, when he first explicitly or hinted at his framework in a paper in response to a criticism by Owe Wettstein. We say, well, in uttering a name, or in uttering this is your, for instance, there is a proposition created, and the proposition created is what later on he calls the reflexive content. So we can say that being the bearer on N or being called N is a property articulated by the very utterance of the name. It is what I characterize as being part of the reflexive content of the utterance containing the relevant name. In short, names are million-tour of direct referent, even though we tokening put for connotative information, and this connotative information is something which is cash out or is captured in the reflexive content, and it's when we analyze the communicative interaction and so on and so forth, or linguistic interchange, well, we can focus sometimes on the reflexive content and sometimes on the official content and sometimes on both. So, conclusion, I'm in time, no? Yeah. Conclusion, the reflexive property articulated by the use of a proper name does not undermine, as far as I see, the main gift of Mill's theory and the view what it is an extra semantic fact that the referent bears such a name. There may be some reason why we tag an object with a name, but this reason is not a semantic fact. A different convention or name-using practice could have been initiated. And this goes with Mill's view expressed in the quote I mentioned at the beginning, which I repeated here. It may be said indeed that he must have had some reason for giving those names rather than any other. And this is true. But the name, once given, is independent of the reason. So as Kripke put it, naming a necessity, we can use description to fix the referent, but once the reference is fixed, the description is just a tool to fix the reference. So some descriptive information may play a role when baptizing an individual or when fixing the reference. A reference may also be fixed via a description, yet the descriptive content used to fix the reference does not constitute the meaning of the name. Here you can probably everyone remember a Mill example about Dartmouth. How do you pronounce it? Dartmouth, you know. If the river gets shaking away and so on and so forth, Dartmouth, well, it's probably the reason we call it Dartmouth is because Dart, the city, was on the mouth of the Dart. Well, but once the name is given, so the tagging event, such as baptism, is semantically relevant. What is relevant for the semantic of the name is the existence of a name-using practice, namely a convention enabling the speaker to exploit it in a referring act, and secondly, the reflexive content of the utterance, what helps us to explain the different function a name can play in different thought and communicative episodes. Lecture captured Mill's view that name can be used attributively without undermining the main view, Mill view or Millianism about naming. So that's pretty much all. Thank you. Amanda?
I have a clarificatory question. So, for you, for example, when you say that, for example, I use Donosti and not San Sebastian, or I use Polu instead of Josu, those are things that are completely extra semantic. So, the motivation I have is like one name doesn't connote anything different than the other.
Well, if I say Donosti is since, well, here we go back to so-called Frege's puzzle about identity, like Tully Cicero, Esperus, Phosphorus. Donosti is trivial, Frege claim known a priori, while Donosti is San Sebastian is informative. It can give you some information. And one of the information given us, it can be cashed out in the reflexive content, because in the reflexive content of Donostia is San Sebastian, you got the name Donostia and the name San Sebastian, at least a bits of information you get out of it, what's the object, carry two names. Like the,
I can say, this is the Sebastian, for example. I could say that, like, but maybe it's not because it's nothing.
Which will not be a kind. I would say this is the nasty. It's not San Sebastian. I think it's not a. Would say it's not a literal use of the names. So because you will say a will express sort of a contradiction of A is not A. So way to analyze this is the nasty. This is the nasty is not San Sebastian. It's kind of metaphorical or some order, not the literal use.
I think related to this a small detail, when
Yeah.
you accept the attributive use of names and things like John could not, might not have been John, that's not a contradiction, that, right? Or that might be, at least that might not be a problem. So you might say the second one is an attributive.
Well, it depends how we understand it.
Yeah. So exactly, you say.
Yeah, think for it. Yeah, you got some example. Think for instance of example I know. Think of Bob Dylan. You know, his name was Robert Zimmerman, and at some point Bob Dylan can claim after the 60s when he adopted the name Bob Dylan. He say, "I'm not Robert Zimmerman. I am Bob Dylan." Well, can be analyzed as not being a contradiction, and say, well, it's better, and this can, what we in linguistics call metalinguistic negation, sort of like, Kepa is not intelligent, is a genius or is excellent. It's the way to analyze it is, Kepa is better characterized as being a genius than being merely intelligent, and so on and so forth. Or I'm not a doctor, I am a pediatrician, or so on and so forth. Which is the way. And we can analyze this kind of communicative act in exploiting the, seems to me, the reflexive content. Yes, Kepa?
A question about attributive and predicative here.
Yeah.
Because is something you read in Mills, or is it something that Mills said? Because I was thinking predicative use of names to be things like there are a lot of Stephens in the room, or all Stephens are stubborn, or things that they don't seem to be normal uses of proper names. But here in the quote is here, I don't know, it seems that the only thing, to predicate anything its proper name in Mill's words seems to be that it's just a regular use, but in predicate position, or after the verb. But I don't see why that would be predicative. It seems to be the same accounts.
Yeah.
Could be given if you reverse the order, right? York is this, or Mary Brown is that. Then it's not a predicate, but still it's the same information.
You can say this is York and York is this, and so it stresses the view what it's of.
But it's
the form A equal B, because you got by identity you can. So it's probably the wrong way to use predicative or attributive. It's probably the wrong terminology, because nowadays you got this kind of big people coming out from Quine, Birch, Castaneda, lately a bunch of people like Farah, Graf, etc., call predicativism about name, call what proper name are predicates. Not just when they appear in construction, but there are many Stephen in the room, or are many Stephens in England. Yeah, probably predicative is not. It's connotative. Yeah?
I don't know, maybe predicative or attributive is not in the stack, but those examples are predicative or attributive in the sense that the goal of the speaker when using the proper name is not to identify an object so that they can attribute some further property about that object. I mean, in those examples, the object is identified by means of a demonstrative. And then he attributes something about the object by using the proper name. So in that sense, it's a predicative example. It's a predicative use of the proper name. I don't know if it's the best tag or not, but you know, it's predicative or attributive in that sense.
Yeah, if
or
like.
That's how I understood your example.
Yeah, which is. It's like, for instance, in order to analyze a communicative interaction, let's say what someone comes in and he has to meet Kepa Corta or Maria Ponte, and they come in, he asks me, who is Maria Ponte? And they say, Maria Ponte is Maria Ponte. Well, thanks you. But they say, she is Maria Ponte, and so I have. And to analyze this kind of communicative interaction, sometimes you exploit this kind of connotative aspect, which is attributive. Well, about the terminology, probably is not the right terminology, because it suggests what the name is a predicate, which is not something I aim to suggest. It's not something I aim to go with predicativism about proper names. Yes, I can.
Because it's related to that for clarification. So, is it your position that if you have a predicative or call it as you want, use of a proper name in this sense, and a non-predicative use of a proper name, I mean, if I got your point right, there is no semantic difference between those two different uses of a proper name, because they will have the same referential content and the same reflexive content. The difference would be on what the speaker wants to put the focus.
Yeah. It's what the speaker aims to communicate to some extent. For instance, according to the view, is this is York and York is York, being identity statement. The official content or the proposition expressed, Kaplanian content, what is said, is the same, A equal A. Well, but the communicative act can be analyzed as the reflexive content, because we got different reflexive content. So it's probably sometimes a question of focus. Should we focus on the reflexive content or only on the and which take priority in a communicative act or interaction? It's a reflexive content which come into the game here to explain what's causal in this kind of situation. Yes, Stephen?
So I'm a bit confused by that last comment. Is the view then that there are sort of two propositions floating around? You can't just ask, well, is it true or is it false? Because there's two propositions floating around. And in some context, the pure million proposition is the one that's doing the work. And in other contexts,
it's the other one.
Right, it's the other one. And so you can't ask a simple, is that true or false? Is that York? Like, wow, which proposition are you talking about? That seems a bit funny. I mean, not crazy, but...
It's a bit funny, yeah.
It's a bit funny, okay.
Got term limits, no?
Yeah.
At some point.
Right, yeah. So, then I thought, well, wait a minute, in your answer to the question about predicative use versus predicativism, the idea seems to be, I thought at the beginning that the idea was one which has some sort of lineage in linguistics, is that you're using the name as a name, not as a predicate.
Yeah.
You're not even using the name predicatively. You're using the predicate predicatively. Is Cicero. That's the predicate, and the predicate's being used predicatively because that's what you do with predicates. Is Cicero. Okay. But the name inside the predicate is just being used as a name.
A name.
But it's the very fact of actually using the name as part of a predicate, which is enabling you to actually convey this information about the object itself that you're naming them. So then it seems that these two propositions must be quite different. One is an identity statement, but the other one is a very different type of statement altogether, the predicative one. It's not an identity statement at all. So they're two very different types of propositions.
Yeah, because the reflexive content is
Yeah.
not an identity
not an identity
statement.
statement.
Yeah, what's a very good point. Do you mind if I write it down?
No?
No, it's a very nice way to spell out what I was aiming to say, because the name, when it appears in this kind of attributive construction like this is, or truly is Cicero, the name in the predicate, is a noun phrase in the verb phrase,
Right.
it's used as a name,
Yeah.
and and it's probably what helped us to draw the attention in a communicative art to the reflexive content. It may help us to change the focus.
Right.
You see?
Yeah.
What's an excellent point. Thanks a lot.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
I don't like the idea of propositions being floating around for a single utterance. So, and I don't think that's what the framework has to assume. It's like, well, there is a direct question to is true or not, and it's given usually by the referential state constants. The fact is that for that referential being true, the other truth conditions represented by these other fancy things would have to be true too, right? So for this to be York, this has to demonstrate it's a particular city, and that city has to be named with that name, and so they are coherent sort of truth conditions, but they all, at each level, they are different information taken for granted.
So it's very different from a referential use of a description, where the information doesn't have to apply to the...
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So that would be on the one hand. And then I think, follow your remark, that in this case, neither what the speaker wants to convey or make content is irrelevant in this conversation, is neither reflexive nor the official, nor the trivial identity statement, nor the purely reflexive, but something, as you said, I mean, you have an object that is demonstrated by this, and then you don't have another object named by the name, but you have this attributive predicate or something like that. So it's sort of a hybrid, not reflexive. So again, it's true, like all of the other contents are true if it's true, but that's what the speaker, the speaker is trying to say. So, but I think that, well, the reason there are not propositions floating around there. These are theoretical objects that we use to figure out which are the contents of the matrix. But the proposition expressed is usually one. I mean,
the official content is...
No multiple assertions made, it's just one assertion, simple assertion.
Yeah, you got...
Classify the information provided by the utterance using this.
And because...
Even if there were different, in those cases, different propositions floating around, it's not possible for there to be a mismatch in the truth values of those propositions, right?
No, really.
Exactly.
You need something for referential use.
Exactly the example Maria gave earlier. John might not have been John.
Yeah.
Could be a mismatch.
That was why I asked.
Okay, yeah.
Is that-
Yeah, but well, I think, that the intentional operators are applied to referential concepts. So you're going to...
Oh, really?
That's usually...
Yeah, I know usually that's the story, but I would have thought on this view you'd have to allow it to operate on the other content too. It seems to get a true reading of John might not have been John. Because once you buy into Eros' framework, John might not have been John seems, oh yeah, I can get a sort of true understanding of that.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't work if the intentional operator operated only in the million context.
But it's not, when you say that, I could understand that John might not be John, you're not using these literally, right?
In John is John, you are. In John is John, you are. But in John might not have been
It
John,
depends
not.
on the use. I mean, but in those uses in which you can understand that John might not have been John, yeah, not using John might not have been John literally, right?
Why? Just saying that John might not have been called John.
Yeah. So why you would understand it. John, Robert Zimmer or Bob Dylan may not have been Bob Dylan if instead of Bob Dylan you would have adopted another stage name.
That's like saying that Espejo might not have been phosphorus.
But that's his point, is that it's not like that because of this predicative use of the name. It's called
Yeah.
use. I mean, my intuitions are more on your side. I'm saying once you buy into Eros' framework, this possibility opens up.
Yeah.
Might not be right, I'm not sure, but it does open up.
Yeah.
Well, 2 points. But one
Yeah,
more.
sure.
I mean, I think there's an easy way to show the original point that the name isn't doing the work, because if you put it under negation, you have the same name, but it's not, they use predicatively in the same sense. And they'll say, I'm not Stephen Neal, right? Or you say, I am Stephen Neal. Either way, Stephen Neal looks like it's doing the same work. It's the presence of the identity without a negation that's actually giving you the relevant predicativity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it has to be the names that are being used attributively in this, the presence of negation. But the other thing I was curious about was...
Yeah, which says the negation is also what people work on the subject-predicate distinction, like Peter Gage. Sometimes he claims that negation is one of the tests to distinguish between the subject and the predicate. You cannot negate a name, but you can negate a predicate.
If I'm not Adam Sennett.
Pardon?
If I say I'm not Adam Sennett, you have to do something with negation in order to make it scope out over the...
Yeah.
But all I was saying was, it looks like the predicativity is coming from the third clause of the reflexive content, not from the second one. Because the third clause is interacting with the predicate of the sentence. Which maybe you're dead on. But I had a question about the framework. So it looks like the bit of propositions floating around is something Frege thought about. He thought these are just presuppositions, right? That's a presupposition of using a name in a logically proper way, that it has a bearer, and the bearer has that name. And so, and to get the projection right for this to work out, you're going to need something like that anyways. So if I say I might be Adam Sennett, you in effect want the reflexive content to say something like the might scopes over the third part, possibly, but not over the second. It's not I'm saying there might be a convention that allows me to say I'm Adam Sennett, right? So I'm sort of curious, like if there's a reason to prefer this framework for explaining this over presupposition, which we're familiar with from other cases, where you have to, presuppose something to get the sentence to be. So
so your view would say that what in the Paris framework actually, it's called the reflexive content could be spelled out or cash out using presupposition, and this will be more keen to a Fregean framework. Is it?
Well,
so
even
much?
if it's not Fregean, even if it's not Fregean, even non-Fregeans have a notion of presupposition.
Yeah,
right?
everyone.
So like reflexive content goes beyond, I think, just what's presupposed, because number 3 is a presuppose, right? If it equals y. So there's two models. One is treat the relevant predicativity as a result of reflexive content, or treat predicativity as a result of presupposition projection. I guess what I'm asking is if there's a good reason to prefer treating the inference to predicativity, the reflexive content, as opposed to treating it as
presupposition.
Yeah, because then you have the sort of, it's not a very precise notion of propositions floating around, but
no.
at least you have to make sense of anyways to make sense of Mary didn't.
Probably, I have to think about, but it may be what this kind of, to use one of Evan's famous quotations, we are just notational variant. It may be. But I don't know, I have to think about it, and I have to look more on how the framework, when you got reflexive content, and so on and so forth, the Perry, SPI framework, and the people working on presupposition. It may be what, as everyone say, not on this kind of example, but at some point say they may be just notational variant.
But, I mean, if it's a notational variant, it can't just be that you can erase reflexive content and put in presupposition, because not everything that's reflexive content is presupposed.
Not everything go into the presupposition, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That makes sense, I just say, yeah. Samura? Not? Thanks a lot. Got time. Time for coffee.